Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of College and Career Pathways, where every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 2 p.m. we provide you with information on colleges and universities, financial aid resources, technical schools, training programs, skilled trade professions, all designed to help you make the best career decisions possible. I am Tony Cureton, your host, and today we have Felicia from the Michigan Department of Treasury, MI Student Aid. And today we're going to be talking about FAFSA 101 or Financial Aid 101. We're so glad to have you back, Felicia. It's so great to have you guys come out and provide these financial aid workshops for us. It is just such a privilege. And I thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you so much, Tony. Yeah, I wish I had these kinds of resources when I was younger. I often reflect on that.
Absolutely.
It's like, but yay, they at least figured out that at some point it became necessary, right? Thankfully.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, I want to confirm, can you guys see my screen here?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, hopefully I shrunk. Good. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So again, as Tony introduced, my name is Felicia Pelto. I'm from the Michigan Department of Treasury. And then within that, because you know, the government has to have like its overall and all these little branches that stem from it. So Treasury, and then a smaller team known as My Student Aid, which is also the Office of Student Scholarship Grants and Outreach. So this is kind of that outreach portion, which will educate you on the scholarships and grants. And our hope is that with My Student Aid, we'll be able to help you make going to college accessible, affordable, and attainable. So I'll go ahead and get started. Financial Aid 101. And this is just a quick overview of the topics I'm going to talk about. So institutions to consider, of course, the types of financial aid, the FAFSA itself, and what all that entails, federal programs, state programs, MISSG, which again kind of refers back to my office of Michigan Student Scholarships and Grants. Scholarships, just we're going to have a conversation a little bit about those. And then of course, Q&A if you guys have any. So what institutions are you considering? There's three main types. So of course, community colleges, public colleges and universities, and then private colleges or universities. And then I also like to couple within that third one, the private colleges and universities to being considered out of state, because even though you might go to a public college or university that's out of state, they're usually going to be just as expensive or sometimes more expensive than your in-state private college. So just kind of an FYI with that there. You'll notice in the first bullet there that, I'm going to get my little laser pointer, see if that works. Yay. So in that first bullet for each of these, you'll notice that the price kind of, it definitely increases with each one, right? Average COA stands for average cost of attendance. And so within a cost of attendance, that includes the tuition and fees. If there is room and board at that college, because some community colleges do have room and board, my alma mater, Jackson College in Jackson, Michigan, is actually one of the unique community colleges that have housing and meal plans. I'm not aware of another college that does it, but you always know more about your home place than you do about other places. But that's one of the attraction points of going there, is that they're a community college that offers room and board. And then you've got your public colleges and universities, which of course, room and board is always going to be a little bit more expensive at those two places. And then book supplies, oftentimes personal miscellaneous expenses. And those are just expenses where they've surveyed the students on what have you needed to purchase that's been outside of tuition fees, books and supplies, room and board, right? The things that they know about, but what are these extra things you might have had to purchase? And transportation is sometimes a line item. Something I like to always share sometimes the things I wish I knew when I was in college. When I went to my community college and then transferred to Eastern Michigan University, I had thought, I'm going to need a car. I'm going to need a car so that I can get to and from, go to the store, get to and from my classes, et cetera, and so forth. that actually wasn't the case. Most colleges, especially big universities or private colleges and universities, will have transportation costs often included if it's not a line item itself in the cost of attendance. Your bus pass is sometimes your college ID, because just like the University of Michigan, Eastern had their own bus that went all around campus. And so when I had my apartment that was right on the campus, I was able to literally walk maybe a block to the bus stop and get anywhere on that college campus. And so that was something my, kind of student fees were paying for me to have. And so even though I did end up bringing a car, which I always say it's a kind of a dumb expense at that point because I barely used it. I only used it to, occasionally go out and get groceries and to visit home during certain holidays. But then I was paying a parking pass for that car, in addition to having to pay insurance, which is always excessive when you're young. And luckily no car payment. So mostly just the car insurance and the parking pass for the car. But two expenses I always say as a young adult trying to get started with your life and through college, you don't want to have. So just something for you to marinate on. But when it comes to community colleges, of course, you've got your associate and certificate and licensing programs. So a good example of that is like your nursing programs, like your licensed practical nurse, your CNA license, certified nurse's aide, all the way up to your associate in nursing, which would be like your registered nursing license. And I use nursing just because that's an easy example for us to all understand. Maybe you want to get your bachelor's degree. So then you're starting to look at your public or private colleges. And so you get your BSN in nursing, which makes you, a little more educated than the other three nursing certifications that I spoke of. As well as graduate programs, right? You can be a nurse practitioner, which usually they have to get their master's degree in order to do. And crazy enough, which, I don't know if you knew, I didn't know until I became an adult that there's a such thing as a doctorate in nursing. In my mind, I'm like, why don't you just go be a doctor? But, there is still that difference between, a doctorate in nursing and then being a doctor, because you have to decide what your specialty is as a doctor versus a nurse. You're even that much more educated at being a nurse, and you're pretty much just under a doctor, but almost still just as educated as they are. So maybe that's just the line you want to be in, in terms of hierarchy. But as you'll notice here that it's almost, I guess, somewhat double the cost when you look at a public versus private university, or as I said, out of state. So be mindful of that. There are some colleges and universities that will offer associate's degrees, but they're very limited and far and few in between. So also just being mindful of that. And I'm mentioning that too because of some programs I'm going to talk about here in a bit. And this is just like a nice little graphic we wanted to share, mostly to give some perspective of like, what's the value of really having a degree, right? The biggest thing I would say to bring your eyes to is like that very bottom number, the unemployment rate. So essentially, the more education you have, the less likely you are to be unemployed. If you notice, right, it goes from like 11% to, 5% if you have at least a bachelor's degree. And then, of course, you can definitely look at that weekly median income or wage, which might be the motivator for you. I know it was for me when I was young. I was like, I want to be sure that I'm making a decent amount of money. And I also, when I was probably your age, I was thinking to myself, when I looked at jobs online, I noticed so many of them wanted bachelor's degrees that I was like, all right, well, if I at least have a bachelor's degree, I always can get a job. That was how I thought. So, and of course, this would just kind of go up, the weekly median income. And then of course, the unemployment rate is assumptively to continue decreasing the more education you get. All right, and then types of financial aid. So there are three, we break it down into three types. Excuse me. There's free money, which of course are scholarships and grants. Earned money, which is work, study, or any kind of part-time employment. And then borrowed money, which are student loans. And, we have to essentially make sure, because types of financial aid, right? these are the main three types. And even though loans have been in the media these days a lot, they are a form of financial aid. It's something that the school or the federal government will offer. If for some reason that cost of attendance I mentioned earlier isn't met by your free or earned money. So it's more just, we want to make sure we educate you instead of throwing you out into the wolves and you suddenly seeing a loan there and feeling like you have to take it. Because just so you know, when accepting or declining a loan, it is important to consider whether or not you'll earn enough after college to pay off and have a manageable debt. But I can speak from, experience as well as working in the field a long time, and even peers that, oftentimes they would see that stuff on their award letter. They were overwhelmed trying to get through everything and figure out school, get it paid for, that they would just accept whatever was on there. And so I just want you to know that you can accept or decline any form of aid, whether it's free or borrowed money or earned money even. And scholarships come from a lot of different places. Well, all this money comes from a lot of different places, right? So there's the federal government, which is where that FAFSA comes from, I'll be talking about next. The state government, which is where I hail from. And then the institutions and colleges themselves have their own, usually grants, scholarships that they can offer you. There used to be loans that they would offer, and some institutions still do. The larger ones that have their own kind of money, they can sometimes offer their students loans, but not many do these days. And then private or third party. So associations, foundations, clubs, employers, churches, unions. So I say anywhere you live, work, eat, or play, anywhere there's money exchanged, there's probably a scholarship that you can find there. I can say from experience as well that my stepmom, she worked for the state prison, right? Because Jackson, Michigan, lots of people know it as Prison City because that's where our prison is. But she worked there as a corrections officer, and she had worked there about 20 years, right? So even a couple years before I was graduating from high school. And somebody like me said, you should ask your parents if their employers offer scholarships. And I asked her. A couple weeks later, at one point at the dinner table, she comes up and drops an application to me and says, I never even knew this was here until you told me to go ask for it. So just kind of, think of anywhere, whether you're paid or paying, money exchanged, it probably offers a scholarship, because she even says to this day, which, it's now years later, they don't advertise it. They do not advertise their scholarship. They wait for people to ask for it, and then they offer the application to them. So some places just don't. And then now there's the FAFSA, which I say is the key to the entire financial aid process. Without the FAFSA, you're essentially leaving all that money on the table. So the first thing for the FAFSA is making sure to register for your FSA ID. And so this is the website, www.fsaid.ed.gov. And you'll probably notice it forward onto studentaid.gov, because the government is doing a really good job with trying to consolidate everything into one place. You used to have to go to a different website to do your student loan stuff, a different website such as FAFSA to do the FAFSA and all of this. Now it keeps going to studentaid.gov, but they still own these domains, and it's a very easy way to tell the computer where you want to go, because going to studentaid.gov, it's going to give you all kinds of information, which is overwhelming. So I would say just go on to the studentaid.ed.gov to create your FSA ID. And this is what the page should look like. And then essentially what it'll look like in terms of starting the FAFSA, because from there, once you create your FSA ID, it will ask you if you want to go ahead and get started on the FAFSA. Now, if you want to do that, if you do that today or anytime before October 1st, it's going to ask you if you want to do the FAFSA, but it's going to be last year's FAFSA. So don't do it yet. The FAFSA doesn't open up until October 1st, okay? So the whole point of you going and creating your FSA ID at this point would just be for the purposes of having it for when you get ready to get started. Because then you're going to go to start here. It's going to ask you how you want to start the FAFSA, which would be using your FSA ID. the student's FSA ID specifically. And that'll actually get a good portion of the beginning of the FAFSA done for you. It'll auto-populate like your name, your address, and a lot of that stuff that you put into the FSA ID for your personal information. It also prevents you as the student potentially mistyping, whether it's your date of birth or your social security number, and causing an issue with signing it at the end. That's actually a really common thing that happens if someone starts the FAFSA without their FSA ID versus starting it with it. And then if you decide to go and try and do it, after hours, just so you have this is the federal student aid support channels and hotline. So there's someone Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to midnight. Isn't that crazy? Till midnight. So you could start that at 11:30 at night, and have help, which, back in my day, I feel like everybody stopped at 6, like we acknowledge that you might get out of work at 5, but you got until 6 that they'll help you an extra hour. Saturdays, 8 to 5 p.m. So the typical work day on a Saturday, and then Sundays, noon to 6. So pretty much they are available at all these great and awkward hours that you might suddenly go, oh, I need help because you just decided to do your FAFSA. And then of course, I don't know how much you'll really connect to them, but they do have their connections on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Lots of YouTube videos also on their for federal student aid, as well as on Twitter, but I don't know, I don't follow them myself, so I was like, so it's up to you if you'd like to. I feel like I get all their other emails, because I'm part of the whole financial aid world. I see all that stuff and I'm like, I don't want to see them in my personal stuff too. Like I don't have a work Twitter or email and all that. So, but when it comes to the FAFSA, I want to share some facts too. So keep in mind, it can be completed online, which is really the only way you want to complete it. Because when you do it online, it's almost instant. You get it done. And at the end, it's going to share this EFC that I'm going to talk about here in a moment. And it's going to let you know that it's complete or if it's incomplete and what's wrong with it if it's not complete. So that's what's great about online. Back in the day, you could do it via paper and mail it in. And it would take anywhere between 8 and 16 weeks for them to get back to you. And now, luckily, that's not even a thing anymore. You can send in a signature, a physical signature page, and even that gets done within 2 weeks. So it's actually really, really great these days. I say avoid being scammed. The first F in FAFSA stands for free. So if someone's trying to make you pay for it, run in the other direction. And I would even say, screenshot it and share it with FAFSA, one of those support numbers or emails, and let them know someone's out there trying to scalp for money because they really shouldn't be. You do have to complete the FAFSA every single year. So it's very common that, if you consider the fact, like right now we're in September, you're in the middle of school, same thing is going to be next year and every year after. School will have started for you. You're going to be, literally neck deep in studying, getting schoolwork done, figuring out where you are this school year, possibly even doing your first exams or tests, studying for those. So I always suggest signing up or getting your phone nowadays, right? Your phone can be your reminder, putting in your calendar, October 1, complete my FAFSA, just as a reminder for yourself, because there's been times when working at various colleges that I've specifically seen students, come into the office at some point, gosh, even next month, let's say, and they're like, I've been getting these notifications that I owe a bill. What is this? And I'm like, take a look. And I'm like, you don't got your FAFSA. We don't have your FAFSA. And they're like, oh, I need to do that every year. Like, I thought last year was it. And it's like, no, yeah, you got to do it every single year. And so, of course, they're going to school, but, they're kind of freaking out now because they're like, I can't pay for this. Like, can I still do it? And I'm like, absolutely, you can. You just want to get in there and do it as soon as possible. And then for the state of Michigan, which is where I hail from, March 1st is our deadline. But if you're doing it as early as October, you're always going to hit our deadline, because technically this October is when the FAFSA opens up, and we're talking about our deadline coming up in the future March of next year. So as long as you get it done, I always say try and get it done before December, like, so essentially before Christmas at the absolute latest. But, you know, the sooner the better, because there's so much stuff, so much money that's out there that's first come, first serve. Okay. So the sooner you do it, the better. So this year's FAFSA, the 23-24 FAFSA, is going to be out in just, gosh, a few days. What, this Sunday? Or no, this Saturday. I'm looking at my calendar. This Saturday. So how crazy. October 1st is this Saturday, which I anticipate, just as an FYI, because it's happened every year. If you guys are listening and you're actually going to do it October 1st, it's very possible that there could be some crashes on their website. I remember one time they had shared with us, and this was a few years ago, I'm sure, hopefully it's increased by now even, but usually by like October 15th, there's over like 500,000 or more FAFSAs completed nationwide. So I'm always like, be one of those 500,000 and get it done ASAP. But if the computer or the website crashes because, you know, so many people are on it all at once, just be patient. Or I would say go on there at some awkward time. I was one of those students that, for example, I knew like registration at my colleges would open like at 12:01, like 12:01 in the morning, midnight, after midnight. And so I was that person that would set an alarm for myself to go on. So I had the first pickings of classes. So you could do the same thing with the FAFSA, you know, be that person that gets on at that weird time and probably everyone else is asleep. So you've got plenty of time to do it. And then next year, it's going to be the 24-25 FAFSA, and it will become available October 1st of next year. So October 1st is just a standing deadline. That's been the deadline since I've started college and long before I started college. And then they have made improvements, which allows you to do IRS data retrieval, which means that your information from the IRS can be directly imported over to the FAFSA itself. But you do have to make sure your information matches 100%. And what that means is so it's going to ask you to verify some information like your name and your address and the way it was written on your last tax return. So if you abbreviated state or street or Ave or road, you want to make sure you do that on there. Otherwise, they're going to assume that you're a hacker and they're not going to tell you what's wrong with it. They're just going to keep saying it's not working. And they do that as a protection mechanism. And I also like to remind or let people know too, that when you do complete the FAFSA and you do IRS data retrieval, you will get a letter from the IRS letting you know that your information has been used on a FAFSA. And that's just another way that they're trying to protect you and your information to let you know that it has been used, just in case that wasn't you, right? And someone's trying to log in and use your credentials to get free financial aid money. Because unfortunately that has happened in my career. I have had the opportunity of catching some scammers that were trying to pretend to be someone that they weren't, to essentially get some free financial aid money. Because, you know, if they're taking out aid under your name, whether it be grants or scholarships or loans, you know, you're the one that's going to be responsible for that cost at the end of the day, not them. And so that's why it's actually like a hot opportunity, unfortunately, for thieves to try and capitalize on. All right, so this is now talking about that EFC I had mentioned. It's called the estimated family contribution. So assuming that you've gotten through the FAFSA, all's good and gravy, you've gotten everything done, this is what you're going to see at the very end. And it only comes up when the FAFSA is processed. So if for some reason it can't give you an EFC, it'll let you know like there's some missing information that you need to go back in and update in order for it to provide that. And it's estimated only because at some point you may be asked to do verification through the school, where the school will ask for specific documents, which will feel very repetitive. You'll be like, I put that information on the FAFSA, why are you asking for it again? And it's essentially because the federal government wants to make sure that the integrity of the program is holding up, meaning you are honest about what you put on there. And so they want the school to verify that the information you put on there is correct. Even if it got transferred over from the IRS, they're still going to ask because that's just them trying to make sure things are good. So I always say, if they ask for information, give it to them as soon as possible. so that you can get your earliest and quickest award letter. So the EFC, it determines what type of financial aid you're eligible for, but it does not determine the amount that you would pay out of pocket, okay? And the variables that impact the EFC are student and parent income, family household size, number in college, and the amount one would pay in taxes. And it will ask about some asset information, but it usually predetermines that based on these other factors. And then oftentimes students and parents will say, my student's going to be living out of the house, they're going to be on their own. Do they really need my information? And so the government's very specific in who they consider an independent versus a dependent student. An independent student is someone that they consider over the age of 24, married, has kids or dependents other than a spouse, right? Because in the previous, if you're married, naturally you're independent, doing things on your own. Going to graduate or professional school. So if one of us are like smart guy or boy genius or girl genius, we're in graduate school at 12 years old, somehow they'll consider us independent. If we're a veteran, a member of the armed forces, experienced time in foster care, an emancipated minor, a person without housing or at risk of becoming without housing or homeless, which of course requires documentation. And then other circumstances determined by the Financial Aid Administration due to outstanding circumstances. So of course, all of these on some level would require documentation one way or another, right? But essentially, these are the ways that they determine independence. So it doesn't have any variable or any relationship to whether or not you'll be living at home, whether or not your parents will be providing assistance to you or support. It's more looking at what was your circumstances while growing up, or, some of them are now, but most of them while growing up. And then there's a question, of course, of which parent's information should I use? So if your parents are both married, naturally you'll use both. However, you only need one parent to help you complete the FAFSA because it's only going to take one parent's FSA ID. But if your parents are married, it's assumed that they would probably file joint taxes. So it'd be that easy for that one parent to put in both parents' income information. But if they file separately, that's fine too. They would just need to collect that other parent's tax information and essentially combine them when they go to put that information into the FAFSA. If your parents are legally separated or divorced, it's going to be whichever parent has custody over you. If your parents remarried to a step parent, because your biological parent got remarried, that is now your mother and, adopted at that point father, right, or parent. And so that remarried parent's information or step parent information is going to be included with your parents' information. If your parents were never married and not living together, again, that's going to be whoever has custody over you. And then if your parents were never married but living together and essentially acting married, then the government sees them as married and wants both of their information. And then earlier we talked a little bit about those special circumstances that could make a student or someone independent. But there's other circumstances that could also be considered. And we call that professional judgment that's what the government calls it. That's what financial aid offices are calling it. And it's specifically students with special circumstances that could be eligible for what they call a professional judgment. A special circumstance essentially allows the student's financial aid award package to be reevaluated based on the circumstance. And the only way to get that considered is by talking to the school or college's financial aid office. So for example, if you did something specific with one college or university, that's up to them to make their own independent decision for that circumstance. And every school and college has their own written policy on how they're going to handle that. So one decision at one school doesn't directly affect or impact the decision of another school, or just roll over to another school even. You do have to bring it up at each and every one. But some special circumstances can include, and are pretty common, unfortunately, but changes in income. I always say, let them know about a decrease, not an increase. An increase will catch up, but a decrease, that is impacting you right now. So it doesn't hurt to let them know, like, hey, during the pandemic was a pretty common one, that naturally a lot of people were losing jobs or weren't going to work due to the pandemic. So lots of change in income at that time. Household size due to divorce, unfortunately, is a very common one. But again, that's a loss of income as well as a person sometimes. So that would be another reason to inform the school. Or as in the circumstance of dependency status, it is often due to a family breakdown of some sort, such as abuse or neglect. As I mentioned earlier, with someone without proper housing or at risk of being homeless, or other circumstances that include some official documentation. So as I kind of mentioned before, it's not about the financial reliance or the tax filing status or academic term residency. When it comes to dependency status, the government does not see that as a qualifying reason to make someone independent. They're specifically looking at more so the relationship and the circumstances that someone is in at that time. All right, so assuming you've gotten all through the FAFSA, you've got your EFC, you're good to go. These are the different federal programs that you would be eligible for, or be considered for, I should say. So there's the federal Pell Grant, which is the largest federal grant that it's what all students are considered for when doing the FAFSA. Then there's the Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant. I know that's a big word or big string of words, but you'll see it often abbreviated as FSEOG if you have received it. Some students will see, both a Pell Grant and that on their award letter. Some may just see just the Pell Grant or, just the FSEOG. So you could have a combination of any of these, really. There's the Federal Work Study, which I'll talk about that, but that's about part-time employment. There's a Teacher Education Assistance for Higher Education grant. So anyone thinking about being a teacher could be considered for that grant. And there's a federal version as well as a state version. So just know if you're considering teaching, there's two kinds of teach grants. The Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant. So kind of as it sounds, if you served in Iraq or Afghanistan, you could get a grant to assist you to go to school. Then there's the federal direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans, as well as the federal direct plus loans. And just as another reminder, federal grants do not have to be repaid, but federal loan funds do have to be repaid, and with interest a lot of times. But there's some positive changes even coming to loans right now. So, better circumstances for those. So when it comes to Pell Grant, as I mentioned, it is the largest grant that the federal government provides. I'm going to do one more click. I thought it would flip us. But you have to complete a FAFSA. And as I mentioned before, it is the key to financial aid. To not do the FAFSA is essentially to tell the government, like, I've got it. I don't need your help. I got money just hidden somewhere and I got this. So you want to make sure that essentially if you have a cry for help for money, completing the FAFSA is the best way to kind of blow that horn to them and say, hey, I need some help. And then from what we know, families making less than $27,000 automatically receive what is a zero EFC, which means that their college-bound student can be eligible for the maximum amount of federal Pell Grant. So for this year, the maximum Pell Grant is the $68.95. And what that number means is that's how much a student could receive for an academic year, assuming that they're full-time. So if you're full-time, getting that $68.95, and I'm just going to do some quick math here, because what that number would be is divided in half. And so it comes to $34.49 is what the most a student can receive per semester in terms of Pell Grant. And that, again, is assuming you're going full-time. So if you decide to go half-time, you would get half of that amount. And we also like to share this information to show that if you think back to the very beginning slides where I was showing you how much the average cost of attendance was for community college, public and private colleges and universities, if the true average cost, right, is that $18,000 for a community college, and then this is only $68.95 for an academic year, and I'm just kind of doing around 18,000 and then this 1895, that's still an $11,000 potential deficit, right? So even the poorest of us don't necessarily get all of our aid paid for or all of our college paid for without the assistance of multiple sources of aid, so I just kind of want to bring that up, because I know I hear a lot of times where people will go, oh, you know, poor people get free college. And it's like, no, everybody still has to put some skin in the game one way or another, whether it's making sure to apply for multiple sources of aid, scholarships, and all these different things. So then there's the federal work study program. I was a student that got federal work study, and I actually say that it's what projected me into where I am today, honestly. Just kind of speaking of which, I actually met the dean that hired me as a student worker for my first work study job just this past weekend. It was kind of a blast from the past that we got to catch up, and it was such a fun experience. And, you know, we got to talk about, you know, where our careers went since we had parted. But work study in and of itself is a grant that'll show up on your aid award, on your student award letter, and it allows you to get a part-time job on campus that can help you with college expenses. So I always say don't count it directly as part of your college, paying off your college, because it doesn't pay towards your on-campus like bill. It won't pay towards your bill directly. Usually what you're offered in the fall, you earn that as a paycheck, just like you would with any other job. And then the future semester, if you save that money, you could pay parts of that off. But it's not going to immediately hit your bill. So it's not that, you know, you're awarded $3,000, $1,500 per semester. So $1,500 comes off your bill and now you work that off. You can earn up to 15, and based on the hours you actually work, you'll get paid that weekly or bi-weekly, depending on how the college does it. But it helps you fund wages while you're a student. And then the positivity about it is that what you earn doesn't count against you on the FAFSA. Because if you remember earlier, one of the factors was student and parent income. Even though you might make this income, there's a special line item out in a different place on the FAFSA that suggests need-based employment, which is what this is. And so it would allow you to put that same dollar amount there and essentially wipe out that earned income that you have, showing, because the government doesn't want to count their money that they're giving you. They only want to count the money that you get outside of them. But it's also a great opportunity for you to get into a job or a career early on in the game, right? As soon as you start college, allowing you to get experience in a field that you're interested in. I was a business major, so there wasn't any particular place I cared to work for, but I ended up working in student services, which included academic advising, financial aid, and so I was just kind of a generalized customer service rep. And that really helped push my trajectory into being in a financial aid, because I learned so much in terms of helping other students, overhearing what other staff were doing. And then within a couple of years, I actually ended up working full-time at my Jackson College school as a financial aid administrator. And then, as I said, I just kind of kept going from there in terms of working in financial aid. So I knew business and numbers were something I liked. And so it just helped me keep going there. But if you're an art major, for example, because I knew I had a friend that did that, she worked specifically in the art department, and that was her thing. And so, yeah, you could get a job literally anywhere on campus. I say treat it like a job, though, because you'll have to apply for it, get interviewed, accept the job, and, they'll be some of your first references if you really consider it, All right. And then federal student loans. So of course, like I said, we can't just have you out there just fumbling around and figuring it out. We want to make sure that you're well educated and you know what the heck this stuff is. So then you can decide, do I really need it? So there are subsidized and unsubsidized loans. And the way I like to think about it is subsidized means that the government is subbing in for you in terms of interest. So if you borrow $1,000 today, it's going to stay $1,000 until 6 months after you graduate, drop less than half time, or after your grace period. Unsubsidized. So, another example is because of this current government deferment that's been going on, anyone with subsidized loans hasn't been accumulating any interest on their loans. At least their subsidized loans. I think uniquely this year, or for this particular deferment, the government decided to do it for all federal loans. So this is where, unsubsidized is the exception right now. But for unsubsidized loans, while you're going to school, if you borrow $1,000, it accumulates interest the day it pays something on your account and every day thereafter. So it could be, hundreds, depending on how long you're in school, thousands potentially, in terms of how much bigger it gets in terms of from when you borrowed it, because it accumulates interest at all times. Then there's a Parent Plus loan. Now, the Parent Plus loan is something where the parent is the loan holder. They will not be able to transfer it over into your name as the student. And this is probably the only credit-based loan that you will see when it comes to going to college, other than private loans, because of course those are too. But usually you're going to see this Parent Plus loan offered at an expensive school, because what you'll see is any grants you were offered, scholarships, work study, any of your own subsidized and unsubsidized loans under your name. And then if there's still anything left to be paid, or within that cost of attendance that they're saying, suggesting you'll need money for, that's where this Parent Plus loan is going to come in. And they're essentially suggesting, hey, parent, after your student exhausts all of their money, when it comes to our cost of attending here, we think that you should borrow this much. A parent can accept or decline that, just like you can accept or decline yours as well. But I do say, like, a positive thing about it is, if for some reason your parent isn't eligible for that loan and it suggests that they get a cosigner for that loan, they can deny getting a cosigner to increase your eligibility for borrowing on your own. Just kind of a FYI. And it's funny because they don't care about who the cosigner is. It could be your neighbor, it could be someone that they just walk up to off the street, like, hey, you want to cosign this? They really don't care, as long as you have one. So that's where I'm like, if you can get, if your parent gets denied for it for whatever reason, that's where they can kind of revert it back to you. And I know you may not want that as the student, but sometimes some parents are like, I want them to have all the skin in the game in terms of going to college, right? Ultimately being your decision. So that's how they can do that too. So then some other factors to consider when taking out a loan. So making sure that your monthly loan payment does not exceed 10% of your monthly take-home pay during your first year after graduation. So for example, if your income is $3,000 a month, then your payment shouldn't be any more than $300 a month, right? That's 10% of your take-home, $3,300. Another example of this is your loan debt shouldn't exceed your first year's projected gross salary. So at that point, let's say you plan on, your career is going to give you about $45,000 in terms of a year salary. Don't borrow more in total of $45,000 in loans, because that's where the relationship between your loans and your salary should start to become, inverse essentially. So if your loans start at 45 and your career is at 45, you should be incrementally increasing while your loan is incrementally decreasing as you pay it off. And then just kind of an FYI that there are loan repayment programs and forgiveness options. I actually can gladly say that I know at least a few people who have taken advantage of public service loan forgiveness in terms of this year with that big push from the government. But mind you, I've been always an advocate of knowing about this program, so I pushed that person. So a couple of those people before the government made a big push about it, and they just told me that their forgiveness was applied. So they actually have a zero loan balance. I'm like, yay. But they were working over 10 years with the government. And so I said, hey, you should be eligible for forgiveness at this point. And they checked it out and they were. Took them about a year to hear about it, to get all the paperwork and everything done. But luckily it was done. There's also a couple people I know in terms of teacher loan forgiveness. And that's if you work 5 years in a highly needed area and position, teaching position, that they'll forgive, I believe, up to $50,000 in terms of student loans. And then there's income-driven loan repayment. And so what that means is if you graduate and unfortunately the economy's down, or you're not able to find a position in your field for the income you anticipated, they will adjust your loan payment based on the income you have at the time. And so, some of those people that I recently assisted with public service loan forgiveness. That's kind of why they were still in their payment plan after 10 years, is because when they graduated, they didn't get right into the field they anticipated. They made less than they anticipated. And so it kept them in their loans a little longer because they had to do income driven loan repayment. But then at the end of the day, luckily they were able to get some forgiveness. So yay, government programs when they work. All right, and then just a few information, a little bit of information about student scholarships, grants, and outreach. So we were able to allocate or appropriate over $220 million this year for 7 different state financial aid programs, and all of which are for undergraduate students. Most are need-based, but of course, you're always welcome to go to our website, and I can type this into the chat here. Let me see if it'll let me. Let's see. Might take me a moment, but michigan.gov/my student aid. Oh, there's my chat. Move it. Let me get there eventually. www.michigan.gov/my-student-aid. All right, and I wanted to make sure it was hyperlinked too. So put that HTTPS : all that stuff in there. And you can also, do the QR code, but going to our website will give you program details, eligibility requirements, fact sheets, all that good stuff. And these are our various state programs. So the last 2 aren't going to be relevant to you, but we like to promote and tell people about them, of course. Just let them know that we've done good things with state money. But the first one, Children of Veterans Tuition Grant, that one is specifically, as it kind of sounds, if you're a student whose parent was in the military, became disabled, or died in the line of duty, you would be eligible for this veteran tuition grant. If you or anyone you know has experienced foster care after the age of 13, then you may be eligible for that Foster and Future Scholarship. Michigan Competitive Scholarship is if you scored a 1200 or higher on the SAT. So that's, another good reason other than school entry exams. Another good reason to get good scores is to get some free money. Michigan Tuition Grant is kind of the sister of the Michigan Competitive in the aspect that Michigan Competitive goes to private or public institutions, whereas Michigan Tuition Grant goes to private. The Police Officers and Firefighters Survivor Tuition Grant, again, kind of how it sounds. If your parent was disabled or died in the line of duty for being a police officer or firefighter, you could be eligible for a grant. There's the Tuition Incentive Program, which is our largest program I'll actually be talking about next. And then there's Future for Frontliners and Michigan Reconnect. Future for Frontliners is it's still a program, but there's no longer an application for it because it was very limited and was when COVID first came out. Michigan Reconnect is kind of a continuation of that, but specifically for those 25 or older. So if one of your parents don't have an associate or certificate degree yet, you could let them know, like, hey, mom or dad, you might be eligible to get some free money to help you get your first associate's or certificate degree. To be eligible for our scholarships and grants, you want to just make sure that you maintain Michigan residency, of course, maintain U.S. citizenship, permanent residency, or approved refugee status. You'll notice that FAFSA being brought up again. You've got to complete that FAFSA because essentially we know that the best combination of going to school is making sure that you're getting funds from everywhere, federal, state, and otherwise. So we want to make sure you're doing the federal part. Usage and approved Michigan college or university. So that answers the question of, can I take it with me out of state? No, you can't. It has to stay in state. We want to kind of reinvest in ourselves, in our state. Enroll at least half time. Now, I doubt students, you haven't been to school to get loans. So of course you don't have any loans in default. So I won't worry about that for you. High school diploma, certificate of completion, or its recognized equivalent, as well as making sure to meet this institution's satisfactory academic progress standards. So at the end of the day, just like in school, you don't want to get lower than a certain GPA. You don't want to be failing classes, withdrawing from classes, or not attending. because doing any of those things can impact your financial aid and cause you to lose it. And then, as I kind of mentioned earlier, our FAFSA deadlines. So for FAFSA, when it comes to state awards, March 1st is going to be that deadline. So as I mentioned, if you do it long before then, such as anywhere between October and December, you're well before the deadline. And I just don't even want to give you any other options, because if you do it any later than that, you're just increasing the risk of losing other aid, not just state aid. And the way we know of where to send your money is going to be based on the order of things. So if you put your first preferred in-state school on the FAFSA, that's where we're going to send your money. If for some reason you don't get into that school and you end up getting into your second favorite, then you can either update your FAFSA, you can create an MISSG student portal to update it with us, or you can give us a call at this number here, which will actually be visible at the end of my presentation as well. And then I mentioned the tuition incentive program. So that's our largest program. Oh. And students are identified as eligible if they received Michigan Medicaid for coverage, so the state insurance plan, for 24 out of 36 months, anywhere between the ages of 9 and high school graduation. And so we get a roster every November from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services that lets us know who should be eligible. There's no application needed. You just want to make sure that if you are eligible, you graduate from high school before age 20. But if you decide to go to early or middle college, then you'd want to make sure you graduate before the age of 21. And then to begin using your benefits within 4 years so that you don't essentially lose it. And to begin using your benefits, that means just take a couple of classes and be at least a half-time student somewhere for at least one semester. Once you've activated your benefits, you've got 10 years from that first payment before they just disappear. And there's 2 phases. I call the first one your associate degree phase, because that's what it's focused on supporting you with. If you go to your in-district community college, so whatever community college is closest to you, we will pay full tuition and give you up to $250 in mandatory fees. If you decide to go to a private or independent Michigan college or university, we're going to pay the average in-district community college rate. And so this year that was determined to be $122 per credit. And then that's still along with the $250 in mandatory fees. And then if you decide to go to a Michigan public university, again, you want to make sure you're working on your first associate or certificate program, then we'll pay the lower level resident rate and that $250 in mandatory fees. And so the importance, if you decide to go to your Michigan State or your U of M, is making sure that they actually offer a certificate or associate's degree in your program. If they don't, what they do is they're putting you into a bachelor's degree, and that bachelor's degree, because that's what's assigned to you, is what we have to go by. And so if that's the case, you're technically not working on an associate's or certificate degree. And so you'd only be phase 2 eligible. And phase 2 covers up to $500 per semester or $400 per trimester or term. And so again, this would be all that you would be eligible for if you, let's say, go to U of M, sign up to be in their Bachelor's of Business program or their BSN program. Then unfortunately, you can't even utilize phase 1. You're only utilizing phase 2, which happens in your junior and senior year. So that's where it's best to, if you can start at community college, get that associate's and keep going. And then you're utilizing the full breadth of the program. And then MISSG, this is that student portal I had mentioned earlier. And so this is where you can either update what school you're going to, as well as check your TIP status. So if you're a student that may be eligible for TIP, you can actually go out there right now and see if you are eligible for TIP. And if so, that might change your plans a little bit in a positive way. And so I'm going to go ahead and type that into the chat as well. /MISSG. Now, if you're not eligible for TIP, for example, it may not let you create this portal. Not yet is what I'll say. But once you've completed your FAFSA, then you'll be able to create this portal, and it should let you know if you're eligible for any other scholarships and grants that we offer specifically. And then just some other things you can do in the portal. So as I mentioned, there are other scholarships and grants. The Children of Veterans, Fostering Futures, and Police and Firefighter Survivor Tuition Grant are some that we don't get any information from anywhere specific. They're self-identifying. So you would have to essentially let us know, hey, I think I'm eligible for this. And then we'd communicate with you to let you know what you need to give us in order to verify that eligibility. You can also receive important communications from us. Whenever we send awards somewhere, we will let you know how much and what we sent and how much we sent to where. Of course, you can update your contact information. Like I mentioned, view your eligibility status, payment status, as well as email us specifically. So without having to provide too much information about yourself, because you email us through the portal, we know exactly who you are. And when you ask a question, we can look at your account and verify that information you're asking. And then of course, our website has a wealth of information on it. So for example, if you want your parent to see such a presentation such as this, you can actually go to our website and click on that Student and Families tab, which you'll see based on the links I've already put in the chat. And we actually are going to be doing virtual financial aid nights, which means that they're going to be getting this exact same presentation and be able to see and hear everything you just saw and heard today. So that they're aware of that information, and you never know how your parents might interpret it versus you. And plus it's just a lot of information. So sometimes to hear it again is a great thing too. So just an FYI, we're going to be doing that every Tuesday throughout October and November at 6:30, and you can sign up and register on our website. But also through our website, there's these publications, detailed information about our different programs, our social media, scholarship search, and as I mentioned earlier, the student portal. And then this is our Michigan Scholarship Search website too. So based on the county you live in, you can pick what county, and then it'll generate a list of scholarships that we're aware of beyond us. So based on institutions that are in your county, scholarships, foundations, associations that have made scholarships in your county, all of that information can be found here. And then of course, if you have any questions, I'll be here to hang out. But regardless, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to present to you today. And I hope you found this as a wealth of information, okay? But I'll bring that back up so then if you want to take a screenshot or anything like that, you're able to.
You guys got any questions?
I do have a question, Miss Tony. Is there a cap to certain financial aid? And this is not even really for the students. This is for me. Like I got financial aid throughout my master's degree program, but I was wondering, like, is there a limit as to how much financial aid that you can get?
Yeah, most things do have limits. For example, Pell Grant usually ends once we get our bachelor's degree. Student loans have just their lifetime limit based on what program we're going for. So it just really all depends on, how much you've utilized. But usually if you're applying at any particular school, that financial aid officer will be able to dig in further and see exactly, where you're at regarding the limits.
Thank you.
Of course.
Felicia, I do have a question.
Absolutely.
With regards to what kind of programs Pell Grant covers. Of course, we know they cover community colleges and universities, but private programs, especially the ones that are online, offering online education, specifically and only.
Yeah.
Will the Pell Grant cover the financial aid for some of those programs?
Yeah, they do most, honestly. It's really about their accreditation. If they've gotten those certain accreditations of acknowledgement, then the Department of Ed will acknowledge them and then allow them to be a school that's qualified to manage financial aid. but some schools, especially some of these like you mentioned, certain private or even some trade schools, they just don't want to go through
Yeah,
the
yeah.
work of that certification or accreditation. So they're
Yeah.
like, if you either pay out of pocket or don't come, is how they'll feel
Yeah.
about it. But honestly, I would say it's in their best interest, because it just speaks to how well their program is. If the government's going, yeah, we'll give you money for it,
Sure, sure. And do you happen to know whether or not the qualifications for workforce development grants through Michigan Works, are they the same? Well, not the same. Are they along the lines of a Pell Grant?
I'm not 100% sure. I know that they sometimes supplement.
Yeah,
I am aware that sometimes they'll supplement a Pell Grant,
yeah.
or even replace it. Meaning, if kind of
Mhm.
back to, I think even Deanna's question of, are there limits? Sometimes if someone has spent through all of their Pell Grant, for example, they may assist in terms of using their funding to help a
Mhm.
student go to school. So sometimes they'll work together, and then sometimes separately. I would say it's probably even possibly similar to Reconnect, because their Michigan Reconnect, I mentioned how that was to help with the first certificate or associate's degree. So if a student has, and this is where I think, sometimes that fine print, right? Because a student will apply for Reconnect. They do have to apply for FAFSA, but if they get a full Pell Grant, that Pell Grant's going to pay for their tuition and fees instead of Reconnect. But
Right.
if they don't have Pell Grant, their Reconnect will pay. And a lot of times students are like, that's supposed to be both, or at least that's how you'd like it to be, right? Reconnect would pay for tuition. Pell Grant should open up and help me pay for other stuff. But unfortunately, that's not how they wrote the program.
And then with regards to Reconnect, is there a time limit? In other words, does a student have to consistently every semester until their completion be enrolled in school, or are they able to take breaks?
They are able to go halftime. They just need to complete, I believe, 12 credits in an academic year is what the conversation was when that was first created, assuming
Okay.
that it stayed the same. But yeah, 12 credits in an academic year, which could be 6 in the summer, 6 in the fall, and then they could take a break. But they just want to see at least 12 credits completed every year. And I think initially it approves them for like 4 years. So, naturally, if they're not done yet, they may have to apply for an extension. But as long as they see progression, that's going to be the difference of an approval or denial.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent presentation as always, Felicia. Thank you
thank
so
you.
much for your time. Thank you everyone for joining. And we appreciate all of the information because it is so valuable. And I know it can seem intimidating, but if you take it in small chunks, step by step, it really is not as hard as it seems, because when you start talking all these numbers, it's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
it really isn't that deep if you take it in smaller increments and not, just let it overwhelm you so much. But again, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining, and we will see you next time on College and Career Pathways. And Felicia, we'll see you next month.
Yes, I look forward
Yay,
to it.
yay. Everybody have a great day.
Yes,
You
take
too,
care, everyone.
ladies.
Thank you.